complete the square to vertex form. But before we get there, let's review from what we did the last couple of days. And especially if you have to retake the quiz, this might be helpful for you. But first of all, this equation is in vertex form. And that is y equals a times x minus h squared plus k. And what we can tell from here is we can tell what the vertex is by looking at the parentheses and changing the sign of that number in there. And then taking the number on the outside and keeping this. This becomes -1, -4. Secondly, the a value in this problem is 6. And it's a positive number, and when things are positive, you might have a smile on your face, so your graph looks like this. And consequently, the point that we're looking at is the turning point a maximum or minimum. It's a low point in the graph, which means that this is a minimum. I should have labeled a moment ago, but here's h and here's k. The axis of symmetry is x equals h. So x equals our h value of -1. And then our y-intercept is 0c, except we can only use that when we have our equation in standard form, which we're going to do momentarily. But it's going to be 0 something, and to figure out what that something is, we're going to pull out our calculator, and I might have it in here already, and we're going to put 0 back into the equation wherever we see x. So it's 6 times 0. We filled in the x with the 0, plus 1 squared minus 4, and it equals 2. Again, we can only find the y-intercept from the equation if it's in standard form. So I'm going to flip the page here. It's off to the right on your notes. But we want to write the same equation in standard form. And consequently, what has to happen with this is we're going to multiply it out. So this is 6 times x plus 1 times x plus 1 minus 4. And when we're multiplying this, what I recommend that you do is you multiply these two together. Where those values came from is that squared means times itself. And we're going to use double distributive property, or we're going to FOIL, whichever works for you. We still have our 6 over here, but now we're going to FOIL. X times x is x squared. X times 1 is 1x. 1 times x is 1x. And 1 times 1 is 1. Minus 4. Well, double distributive or FOIL, whichever way you look at it. Now what has to happen to put this back into standard form is we need to multiply all of those values by 6. So we're going to have 6x squared plus 6x plus 6x plus 6. And don't forget the minus 4 at the end. Again, putting it back into standard form, and I'll define what standard form is momentarily. 6x and 6x, those are like terms. We can add them together. 6 minus 4, those are like terms. We can add them together. Get y equals 6x squared plus 12x plus 2. 6 plus 6 is 12. 6 minus 4 is 2. And what the standard form is this is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. And what we started with is we started with vertex form and we converted to standard form. the thing is, we started with our second equation in here, the y equals x minus h quantity squared plus k, and we converted it back to y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. We can go the other direction. We can start in our standard form, which is the ax squared plus bx plus c, and turn it into the y equals x minus h quantity squared plus k. And what I say in here is that doing that is relatively simple, recognizing that simple for some people in math don't go together at all. Something simple is sometimes never goes together at all. So we're going to work on today converting an equation from standard form, the first equation listed in this sentence, to the second equation, to vertex form. The way we're going to do that is we're going to use completing. Oh, got to spell it right. B-T-E. We're going to use complete the square. To do this. And my steps here are a little bit different from what's on your paper, but I think we can get it fixed up relatively simple. It says rewrite the equation first of all. So it's almost the same as what we did in our last unit with the solving quadratics. But what we're going to do today is instead of the equation equaling 0, it equals y, or it equals f of x. So we're going to rewrite the equation so that it's in the format of c plus y equals x squared plus bx. And what that means is we're going to get all of the terms with the x's on the one side of the equation and the constant on the other side. And I still mostly say put the variables on one side, the constant on the other. Just so you know. My number 2 up here is a little bit different from yours, so listen carefully so you can get it filled in. But mine says divide all the terms of the equation by the coefficient of x squared if it is not 1. Your paper says in order to use completing the square, the leading coefficient has to be blank. It has to be 1. So that's what you're going to fill in on your blank. If it isn't, factor out the leading coefficient and complete the square as usual. So our next step is complete the square by adding b divided by 2 squared to each side of the equation. Nothing new. We're going to factor the trinomial and then we're going to condense. And then lastly, solve for y. This process is different from solving because when we're solving, we're trying to figure out what does x equal. But now what we're trying to come up with is, what is the equation? So let's see how we do that with the example here beside the steps. What we have y equals x squared plus 6x minus 6. And what our first step says is to put the x's on one side and the constant on the other. Well, nothing much is going to change. We're going to add the 6, both sides. Now, I personally tend to go 6 plus y. There is nothing wrong with you going y plus 6. But over here, it's x squared plus 6x. But the thing is, or the nice thing is, there's no number in front of the x squared term this time. So we can go directly to add the box. And if we add the box to one side, we need to add the box to the other side. But the process is still the same as when we were solving quadratics. What we're going to do, we're going to take 6, we're going to divide by 2, equals 3, squared. And 3 squared is 9. And if we add the 9 here, we're going to add the 9 there. So we completed the square by adding b over 2 squared to each side of the equation. 9 plus 6 is 15. Plus y is x squared plus 6x plus 9. That leads us to our next step, which is the factoring, and consequently the condensing. But remember, when we're completing the square, that we need to have the exact same values in these parentheses. So it's x times x. And it's 3 times 3 for the 9. And the sign in front of the 6 is a plus. So these are both going to be plus. Equals 15 plus what? There's our step 4 we factored. I'm going to condense now, so still in step 4, so we have 15 plus y equals x plus 3 squared. And our last step is to solve for y. Let's subtract 15 from both sides. And we get y equals x plus 3 1 squared times 15. What we just did is we started with the equation given in standard form, and we finished our equation in vertex form. And that's what's going to be our process that we're going to work on for the remainder of our time today. We turn it over. The one thing that we do want to add is we want to identify what's the turning point and what's the y-intercept. The good news is, when we look at this, in standard form, A is 1, and B is -8, and C is -20. What we wrote at the beginning of the notes is that the y-intercept is 0C. We can tell what the y-intercept is right now. It's 0, -20. Well, we're able to tell what the y-intercept is, but now what we really want to do is we want to come up with the vertex form, and then we want to identify what the turning point is. So our process is going to start by putting the x's on one side and the constant on the other. So we're going to add 20 to both sides. Again, personal preference. I like to write 20 plus y. If you write y plus 20, there's nothing wrong with it. The nice part on this one is there's no number in front of the x squared. So we don't have to worry about step 2, because it says in order to use completing the square, our leading coefficient must be 1. It already is. So we can go directly to plus something. And the plus something is the same that it's been. We're going to take -8 divided by 2, which is -4, and squared. And -4 squared, if you're typing in your calculator, you need parentheses around it, but it gives us 16. -4 times -4. 16 plus 20 is 36, plus y is x squared times 8x plus 16. And there's some places where you can combine steps, but I just want to make sure that I show all my work. Because now where I am is I'm on step 4, factor the trinomial. When we factor in the completing the square process, these parentheses have to have the same value. They must. But x squared is x times x. And how can we break apart 16 so that it's 2 numbers multiplied by itself, or 1 number multiplied by itself? 4 times 4 is 16. The sign in front of the 8x is negative, so these are both going to be negative. We have 36 plus y. And now let's condense. 36 plus y equals x minus 4 squared. But instead of taking the square root of both sides now, like we did when we solved, we're going to solve for y, and all that requires is moving this 36 over to the other side. So we get y equals x minus 4 squared minus 36. Again, the standard, or the vertex form is a times x minus 8 20 squared plus k. But from this format, because this is the vertex form, that's what I'm going to write down up here in our box. Y equals x minus 4 20 squared minus 36. And once we know the vertex form, we can identify the turning point. Again, change the sign, keep the sign. So 4 negative 36. Problem number 2. Y equals 2x squared plus 8x plus 16. The difference on this one, compared to the previous two, is that there's a number in front of the x squared term. But the process is still going to start the same. We're going to put the x's on one side, the constant on the other. So we're going to subtract 16 on both sides. It's negative 16 plus y equals 2x squared plus 8x. And now we do need to deal with step 2. Now, the difference in this problem here is we have the 2 in front of the x squared term. So if you look at the directions on the front page, it says if the number isn't 1 in front of the x squared term, factor out the leading coefficient. Only the leading coefficient. So we're going to factor out the 2. Think about what would you divide by if we were solving. We would have divided everything by 2. That's what we're going to factor out. When we factor it out, we've got x squared left, 2x squared divided by 2. 8x divided by 2 is 4x. Over here on the left, we still have the negative 16 plus y. But we're ready for the third step. We're going to complete the square. But here's the issue. We're going to put the plus box here. And the plus box is inside of the parentheses. We still have to put the plus box over here on the left side. We have to put an additional part over there on the left side. On the right side, it's 2 times x squared. It's 2 times 4x. It's 2 times box. If we want to keep this equation in balance. So on the other side, this is going to be 2 times whatever we put in the box. So now, let's figure out what goes in the box. Same way. 4 from the 4x divided by 2 is 2 squared. So we're going to put a 4 here. If we put a 4 on the right side, we need to put a 4 in our box over here on the left. But remember, that 4 needs to be multiplied by 2. So what we have now is we have 2 times 4 is 8 minus 16 plus y equals 2 times x squared plus 4x plus 4. Do not distribute the 2. Do not. We can combine a little bit over here. 8 minus 16 is negative 8 plus y But let's combine that with our next step in our list here, which is factor the trinomial. So we're going to factor. But once again, these parentheses must be the same. Well, x squared is x times x. The 4, and the 4 is coming from the constant value, is 2 times 2. And then we look at the sign in front of the 4x, which is a plus. So our signs are going to be plus in our parentheses. And we're to the condensed part. Negative 8 plus y equals 2 times x plus 2 squared. And lastly, we're solving for y. So we're going to add the 8 back over here to the other side. We have y equals 2 times x plus 2 squared plus 8. And that's what I'm going to put in our box over there for the vertex form. That's the vertex form. Y equals 2 times x plus 2 squared plus 8. Our turning point. Can't write my plus very well, but change the sign, keep the sign. It's going to be negative 2, 8. The y-intercept, which I should have looked at a moment ago, if we go back to the standard form, a equals 2, b equals 8, and c equals 16. Our y-intercept is 0, 16. And there we've converted from standard form to vertex form.